Welcome to the Allison Knows podcast. Let's get into it.
Sounds good.
Today, we're going deep on some pretty interesting stuff like conspiracy theories,
Oh, yeah.
human mating preferences,
Okay.
and even U.S. security policy. Ready to dive in?
Absolutely. I think these topics might seem kind of unrelated at first glance.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes the most unexpected connections
Mm-hmm.
can actually spark some really thought-provoking insights.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack all of this.
Okay.
Starting with conspiracy theory.
Right.
We're going to be focusing on QAnon and Gamergate today.
Okay.
Now, I know they seem pretty different at first.
Yeah.
QAnon, with its claims about, a deep state cabal,
Right.
and then Gamergate focusing more on the gaming community.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating to me is how they both just exploded on the internet,
Yeah.
particularly on platforms like 4chan.
Well, yeah, and I think what's really fascinating here is that both of these movements kind of tapped into this power of online anonymity and algorithms.
Mm.
4chan being an anonymous message board.
Right.
It really provided fertile ground for these movements to grow, kind of outside the scrutiny of mainstream platforms.
So are you saying that these online spaces allowed them to kind of spread their messages
Yeah,
and gain traction that they might not have been able to otherwise?
precisely. Yeah. QAnon, with its cryptic Q drops,
Right.
that followers would decipher like a puzzle.
Uh-huh.
It really created this sense of community and insider knowledge.
Yeah.
And then Gamergate, on the other hand, leveraged that outrage over, this perceived ethical breaches in gaming journalism
Yeah.
to mobilize supporters.
It's kind of like how a rumor can spread like wildfire in a small town.
Mm-hmm.
But this time, the town is the internet,
Right.
and the rumor can reach millions of people.
Yeah, it's unsettling.
It is kind of unsettling.
It is a double-edged sword for sure.
Right.
These platforms can be incredibly powerful tools for communication and connection.
Yeah.
But they can also be exploited to spread misinformation and harmful ideologies.
Right. And the lasting impact of both of these movements is undeniable.
Totally.
Yeah, QAnon, despite some setbacks,
Right.
continues to influence political discourse.
Yeah.
And then Gamergate's legacy of online harassment,
Uh-huh.
it still resonates in the gaming world and beyond.
Yeah.
So it really highlights the importance of critical thinking in the digital age.
Right.
Like, we can't just accept everything that we see online at face value.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to evaluate sources,
Yeah.
consider different perspectives, and be wary of information
Right.
that just confirms our existing biases.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's shift gears
Right.
to something a little lighter but equally fascinating.
Yeah.
Human mating preferences.
Ooh.
We're going to explore this through the lens of evolutionary psychology,
Right.
which posits that our preferences are shaped by thousands of years of evolution.
I'm intrigued by this. So you're saying that our ancestors' experiences in the mating game
Uh-huh.
are still influencing us today.
Right. Think about it this way.
Okay.
Those traits that increased our ancestors' chances of, finding a mate
Yeah.
and successfully raising offspring were more likely to be passed down
Yeah.
through generations.
Right.
This is the essence of natural selection.
So are you saying that our brains are basically wired to seek out specific qualities in a partner
Yeah,
that were advantageous for survival way back when?
exactly. We might not be consciously thinking about survival and reproduction
Right.
when we're swiping through dating apps,
Uh-huh.
but those underlying evolutionary forces are still at play.
I see what you're saying. Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so take intelligence and competence, for example.
Okay.
These traits are consistently rated as highly desirable
Yeah.
by both men and women across cultures.
That makes sense, because a partner who's intelligent and resourceful
Yeah.
would have been a valuable asset in navigating the challenges. Right.
Of our ancestral past. But isn't physical attractiveness also important?
Of course.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, we're visual creatures, right?
We are, yeah. Physical attractiveness is often seen as a cue
Right.
for health and fertility, which are crucial factors in successful reproduction.
Right.
But what's really interesting is how these preferences
Okay.
can differ slightly between men and women
Okay.
due to the different evolutionary pressures they faced.
So are you saying that men and women might be looking for slightly different things in a partner,
Uh-huh.
even on a subconscious level?
Precisely. For example, some research suggests that men tend to place a higher value
Okay.
on cues of youth and fertility,
Interesting.
while women might prioritize indicators of resources and stability.
Okay.
These are just broad generalizations, of course,
Right.
and there's a lot of individual variation.
Of course. This is getting really interesting.
It is.
So it's not just about finding someone that we're attracted to. It's about finding someone who ticks certain evolutionary boxes, even if we're not aware of it.
Yeah, it's a complex interplay of biology,
Wow.
psychology, and cultural influences.
Yeah.
We can't ignore the role of personal preferences and individual experiences.
Right.
But, understanding the evolutionary underpinning of mating preferences can give us a fascinating glimpse into the driving forces behind our choices.
This deep dive is blowing my mind already.
I know, right?
Before we move on to our final topic, let me just remind everyone that if you're enjoying this episode so far, we would love for you to like, subscribe.
Of course.
And share it with your friends.
Yeah.
You can find Allison Knows on all the major podcast platforms.
Yeah.
And join Allison Knows on YouTube for even more thought-provoking content. Okay, so now it's time to tackle something a bit more geopolitical.
Okay.
The role of NATO in U.S. security policy.
All right, so NATO has been a cornerstone of Western defense for decades. But its relevance in the 21st century is a subject of ongoing debate.
It makes sense.
Some argue that it's an outdated relic of the Cold War, while others maintain that it's more crucial than ever in a world facing new and complex threats.
Right, because the world has changed so much since NATO was formed back in 1949.
It has.
Back then, it was all about containing the Soviet Union.
Right.
But with the collapse of the Soviet bloc, NATO's mission had to evolve.
Exactly. And that evolution has been a source of both opportunity and tension.
Okay.
On one hand, NATO has expanded its membership to include former Soviet satellite states, which some see as a triumph for democracy and stability.
Yeah.
But this expansion has also been viewed by Russia as a provocation, contributing to the current tensions between the West and Moscow.
So NATO's efforts to promote stability in Europe might actually be contributing to instability in other ways.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers. The question of how NATO should engage with Russia has become one of the most pressing issues facing the alliance. Some argue for a more assertive posture to deter Russian aggression, while others advocate for dialogue and diplomacy to reduce tensions.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is.
And it's not just about Russia, right? NATO is also facing challenges from terrorism, cyber attacks, and the rise of China as a global power.
You're absolutely right. The security landscape has become much more multifaceted since the end of the Cold War. And NATO has had to adapt to address these evolving threats. And this has led to internal debates about burden sharing, with the U.S. traditionally bearing a disproportionate share of the costs and responsibilities.
So the question of NATO's future is really a question about the future of international cooperation and security.
It is. And it's a question that has profound implications for the U.S., which remains the most powerful member of the alliance. U.S. policymakers must weigh their commitment to NATO against other pressing national security priorities and the potential risks involved in confronting adversaries like Russia. It's a complex equation with a lot of moving parts.
For sure.
And it becomes even more complicated when you consider the different perspectives within NATO itself. Not all member states share the same threat perceptions or strategic priorities.
So you're saying there's not always a unified front within NATO? That internal disagreements can sometimes complicate their response to these global challenges?
Exactly. Take the issue of defense spending, for example.
The
U.S. has long urged its European allies to increase their military budgets to meet that 2% of GDP target set by NATO. But not all members have been willing or able to meet this goal, creating tensions and raising questions about, the equitable sharing of burdens within the alliance.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If some countries are contributing more than others, it's bound to create some friction. It's like a group project where some people are slacking off while others are carrying the load.
That's a good analogy. And these disagreements can sometimes play out in very real ways. For instance, remember the 2011 intervention in Libya? The U.S. was initially hesitant to get involved, but ultimately participated in part due to pressure from European allies who saw the conflict as a threat to regional stability.
So in that case, the U.S. felt obligated to act because of its commitment to NATO, even if it wasn't entirely convinced about the intervention itself.
You could say that the Libya intervention became a prime example of the complexities and potential pitfalls of collective action within NATO.
Right.
While the intervention succeeded in removing Muammar Gaddafi from power, it also led to a protracted civil war.
Right.
And instability that continues to this day.
Yeah.
And this outcome raised questions about NATO's role in post-conflict reconstruction and the unintended consequences of military interventions.
It sounds like a cautionary tale about the importance of carefully considering all potential ramifications before taking action, especially when multiple countries are involved.
Absolutely.
It's not just about military victory.
Right.
It's about what happens afterward.
Yeah.
And whether the intervention ultimately contributes to long-term stability or creates even more problems.
It's a crucial lesson.
Yeah.
And one that has shaped NATO's approach to subsequent crises.
Okay.
In the wake of the Arab Spring uprisings and the rise of ISIS, NATO has been more cautious about engaging in direct military interventions in the Middle East and North Africa.
Yeah.
Instead, the alliance has focused on training and capacity building efforts to help partner countries in the region address security challenges on their own.
So it's more about empowering those countries to handle their own security rather than jumping in with troops every time there's a crisis.
Precisely. It's a recognition that lasting stability can only come from within.
Right.
And that external interventions, while sometimes necessary, can often have unintended consequences.
Right.
This shift in approach reflects the evolving nature of security threats in the 21st century.
Yeah. It's not just about traditional warfare anymore, is it?
It's not.
We're talking about terrorism, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and all these other complex challenges that don't fit neatly into the old Cold War paradigm.
You've hit the nail on the head. The lines between war and peace have become blurred, and the battlefield has expanded to include the digital realm and the information space.
Yeah.
NATO has had to adapt to these new realities, developing strategies to counter hybrid warfare.
Bolster cybersecurity defenses and counter disinformation campaigns.
It sounds like NATO has its work cut out for it.
It does.
But it also seems like these new threats require a different kind of response. One that goes beyond just military might.
Absolutely. Yeah. It requires a whole of society approach that involves governments, private companies, and individual citizens working together to counter these threats.
Right.
It also requires a deep understanding of the actors involved, their motivations, and the tools and tactics they employ.
So it's not just about tanks and fighter jets anymore.
No.
It's about intelligence gathering, information sharing, and building resilience against these new forms of aggression.
Right.
It's about recognizing that the front lines can be anywhere.
Yeah.
And everyone has a role to play in defending against these evolving threats.
Oh, exactly. And that brings us to one of the most pressing questions facing NATO today.
How to ensure its continued relevance and effectiveness in this rapidly changing security environment. How can the alliance adapt to these new challenges while remaining true to its core principles of collective defense and democratic values?
It's a big question and one that has no easy answers.
It is.
But it's a question that demands our attention because the stakes are high.
Right.
The future of NATO is intertwined with the future of international security. And the choices made by the alliance in the coming years will have a profound impact on the global order.
You're absolutely right. And as we grapple with these complex issues, it's important to remember that NATO is more than just a military alliance.
Right.
It's a community of shared values, a commitment to democracy, and a testament to the power of collective action.
And speaking of collective action, before we delve deeper into the challenges facing NATO, I want to remind our listeners that you too can be part of our community. If you're enjoying this deep dive, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends.
Of course.
You can find Allison Knows on all the major podcast platforms and join Allison Knows on YouTube for even more thought-provoking content. Okay, now back to the intricacies of NATO and its role in U.S. security policy.
One of the key issues facing NATO today is the question of burden sharing.
Right.
As we've discussed, the U.S. has historically borne a disproportionate share of the costs of defending the alliance.
Yeah.
This has led to calls from both sides of the Atlantic for a more equitable distribution of responsibilities.
Right. It's understandable that there would be some resentment if certain countries feel like they're carrying more weight than others.
Right.
Especially when you consider that some European nations have robust economies and could theoretically contribute more to their own defense.
Exactly. And this issue has become even more contentious in recent years. As the U.S. has shifted its strategic focus toward the Indo-Pacific region, seeking to counter the rise of China. This shift has led some to question the U.S.'s long-term commitment to NATO and whether European allies are prepared to step up and fill a potential gap.
It's a valid concern. If the U.S. is increasingly focused on other parts of the world, it's natural to wonder whether Europe will be able to defend itself if faced with a serious threat from Russia or another adversary. It raises questions about the strategic autonomy of Europe and whether it can truly stand on its own 2 feet without relying on the U.S. security umbrella.
Precisely. And this debate is playing out in real time as NATO grapples with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has been a watershed moment for the alliance, highlighting both its strengths and weaknesses.
On the one hand, it's demonstrated NATO's ability to respond swiftly and decisively to a major security threat. The alliance has rallied around Ukraine, providing military and economic support and strengthening its defenses along its eastern flank.
You're right. But it has also exposed some of the limitations of the alliance. The conflict has underscored the challenges of achieving consensus among 30 member states, each with its own national interests and risk tolerances.
It's got to be tough to get everyone on the same page.
It is. It has also highlighted the need for greater military capabilities and readiness among European allies, particularly in areas such as air defense, logistics, and long-range strike capabilities.
So while NATO has shown unity in the face of Russian aggression, the conflict has also served as a wake-up call, prompting a reassessment of the alliance's capabilities and strategic priorities.
Absolutely. And this reassessment is likely to have significant implications for the future of NATO, shaping its role in the evolving global security landscape.
One key area of focus will be on enhancing deterrence against Russia, which will likely involve increased military spending, deployments of troops and equipment to Eastern Europe, and the development of new capabilities to counter Russian hybrid warfare tactics.
So it's about sending a clear message to Moscow that any aggression against NATO allies will be met with a swift and resolute response.
Exactly. But deterrence isn't just about military strength, is it?
No.
It's also about political cohesion and the willingness of member states to stand together in the face of a common threat.
And this is where the question of burden sharing comes back into play.
Exactly.
If European allies are perceived as unwilling or unable to contribute their fair share to collective defense, it could undermine NATO's credibility and make it more difficult to deter potential adversaries.
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
On the one hand, you need to demonstrate strength and resolve.
To deter aggression. But on the other hand, you don't want to provoke an escalation or create a self-fulfilling prophecy where increased military spending leads to a more hostile and dangerous security environment.
It's a classic security dilemma.
It is.
And navigating this dilemma will require careful diplomacy, strategic thinking, and a clear understanding of the risks and opportunities involved.
And it's a challenge that will require close cooperation between the U.S. and its European allies. Despite the shifting strategic landscape and the inevitable disagreements that arise within any large alliance, the transatlantic partnership remains the bedrock of NATO's strength and the foundation of Western security.
That's a crucial point. The U.S. and Europe share a common set of values and interests.
They do.
And their collaboration is essential for addressing the complex security challenges of the 21st century. It's about recognizing that we're stronger together than we are apart. And that our collective security depends on our willingness to work together to defend our shared interests and values.
Absolutely.
It's about understanding that in an interconnected world, the security of one is inextricably linked to the security of all.
And that recognition is at the heart of NATO's enduring mission. Despite the challenges and uncertainties that lie ahead, the alliance remains a vital instrument for promoting peace, security, and stability in a world that desperately needs it.
It's like the old saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If one member of the alliance is vulnerable, it weakens the entire structure.
And that's why NATO has been working to strengthen the defenses of its eastern flank, particularly in countries like Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states that share a border with Russia. This has involved deploying troops and equipment, conducting military exercises, and improving infrastructure to enhance readiness and deter potential aggression.
So it's about bolstering those frontline states and demonstrating to Russia that any attempt to encroach on NATO territory will be met with a strong and unified response. But deterrence is only one part of the equation, right? NATO is also involved in a range of other activities, from crisis management and peacekeeping to counterterrorism and cybersecurity.
You're absolutely right. NATO's mission has evolved significantly since the end of the Cold War. And the alliance has become a truly multifaceted organization with a global reach.
For example, NATO played a key role in the intervention in Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks. And it's been actively involved in efforts to combat terrorism in the Middle East and North Africa.
Exactly. And as we've discussed, NATO is increasingly focused on addressing the challenges posed by cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and other forms of hybrid warfare. These new threats require a different set of tools and tactics. And NATO is adapting its strategies and capabilities to meet these evolving challenges.
It's like playing a game of chess where the rules are constantly changing and you have to anticipate your opponent's next move while also developing new strategies of your own.
That's a great analogy.
Well, thanks.
And it highlights the importance of innovation and adaptability for NATO's continued success. The alliance can't afford to rest on its laurels or cling to outdated doctrines. It needs to be constantly evolving and innovating to stay ahead of the curve.
And that innovation isn't just about developing new weapons systems or technologies. It's also about fostering strategic thinking, promoting interoperability among member states, and encouraging collaboration with partners outside the alliance.
You've hit the nail on the head. NATO's strength lies not only in its military might, but also in its network of partnerships and its ability to leverage the combined expertise and resources of its member states and partners.
It's about building a collective security ecosystem that can respond effectively to the full spectrum of threats we face in the 21st century. And that ecosystem needs to be flexible, resilient, and adaptable to the constantly changing security environment.
Absolutely. And this is where the concept of resilience comes into play. Resilience is about more than just bouncing back from setbacks. It's about having the capacity to anticipate, adapt, and thrive in the face of adversity.
So it's about building societies and systems that can withstand shocks and disruptions, whether they come from natural disasters, pandemics, or malicious actors.
Exactly. And for NATO, resilience is a key element of its strategic posture. The alliance is working to enhance its resilience in areas such as energy security, critical infrastructure protection, and supply chain management.
It's about recognizing that security is not just about military strength, but also about the strength and resilience of our societies as a whole.
Precisely. And this holistic approach to security is becoming increasingly important as we face a growing number of interconnected challenges, from climate change and pandemics to economic instability and social unrest.
It's a reminder that security is not just about protecting ourselves from external threats, but also about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and live in peace and dignity.
And that's ultimately what NATO is all about. It's about defending our values, promoting cooperation, and building a more secure and prosperous future for all.
And speaking of building a better future, I want to remind our listeners that you can be part of our journey too. If you're enjoying this deep dive, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. You can find Allison Knows on all the major podcast platforms and join Allison Knows on YouTube for even more thought-provoking content. Now back to our exploration of NATO and its role in shaping the global security landscape.
One of the key challenges facing NATO today is the rise of China as a global power.
Right.
China's growing economic and military might is reshaping the balance of power in the world, and NATO is grappling with how to respond to this strategic shift.
It's a complex issue, and there's no consensus within the alliance on how to approach China.
There isn't.
Some see China as a potential partner,
Yeah.
while others view it as a strategic competitor or even a potential adversary.
Exactly. And this divergence of views reflects the multifaceted nature of China's rise and the challenges it poses to the existing international order.
Yeah.
China is simultaneously a major trading partner, source of investment, and a potential source of instability.
It's a balancing act. On the one hand, you want to engage with China and cooperate on issues of mutual interest, like climate change or global health. But on the other hand, you need to be prepared to compete with China and defend your interests when necessary.
And that's the challenge for NATO,
Yeah.
finding the right balance between engagement and competition, cooperation and deterrence. It's about developing a nuanced and sophisticated approach to China that recognizes both the opportunities and the risks involved.
It sounds like NATO is entering uncharted territory.
It is.
For decades, the alliance focused primarily on deterring Russia and defending Europe.
Right.
Now it's having to adapt to a more complex and multipolar world where the threats are more diverse, the actors are more numerous,
and
the stakes are arguably even higher.
You're absolutely right. And this adaptation will require strategic foresight, political will, and a willingness to embrace new ideas and approaches. It will also require a renewed commitment to the principles of collective defense and transatlantic solidarity that have underpinned NATO's success for over 7 decades.
It's a reminder that in an increasingly interconnected world, our security depends on our ability to work together, to address shared challenges, and build a more peaceful and prosperous future for all.
Absolutely.
And that's ultimately what NATO is all about.
It is.
Fostering cooperation, defending our values, and creating a world where freedom and democracy can flourish.
Well said. And as we conclude our deep dive into the intricacies of NATO and its role in U.S. security policy, I think it's important to step back and acknowledge the remarkable achievement that NATO represents. For over 70 years, the alliance has played a vital role in maintaining peace and stability in Europe and beyond. It's a testament to the power of collective action, the enduring strength of the transatlantic partnership, and the shared commitment of its members to defending democratic values and upholding international law.
It's a reminder that even in a world often characterized by conflict and division, cooperation and solidarity are still possible.
They are.
And that's a message worth sharing. If you enjoyed this deep dive into conspiracy theories, human mating preferences, and the ever-evolving role of NATO in U.S. security policy, we encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. You can find Allison Knows on all the major podcast platforms. And for even more thought-provoking content, be sure to join Allison Knows on YouTube.
And don't forget to follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok.
Yes.
We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on the Allison Knows YouTube channel.
Thank you for listening.